4,000 years ago, in the dying light of a great city, a scribe pressed a reed into wet clay. The words he formed were not a tally of grain or a king's decree. They were a verdict. He wrote that the city's own gods had abandoned it, that the great moon god Nanna, lord of Ur, had been ordered to forsake his home, leaving its gates unguarded and its people to starve. This was no distant legend. This was a lament written so close to the fire that you can almost smell the smoke in the lines. It is an autopsy of a state performed by its own clerks as the body was still growing cold around them. It is the story of the Third Dynasty of Ur, a superpower built on perfect order, and how its own meticulous records charted its final, spectacular collapse. To understand the fall, we must first see the machine at its peak. A century earlier, around 2112 BCE according to the Middle Chronology, a king named Ur-Namma founded a new dynasty in the ancient Sumerian city of Ur. He and his successors would unite the cities of southern Mesopotamia, Ur, Uruk, Nippur, Lagash, into a single, centrally controlled state that ran with breathtaking efficiency. This was the Third Dynasty of Ur, and for a time, it seemed unbreakable. Ur-Namma was a builder. He gave his people one of the world's first known law codes, putting justice into written words, and he began a monument that would define his city's skyline for millennia. The Great Ziggurat of Ur. Its base, roughly 64 by 46 meters, was a declaration of stability, made of a mud brick core and an outer skin of baked bricks sealed with black bitumen. Its terraces climbed toward the heavens, a stairway for the city's patron god, Nanna. Ur-Namma's son Shulgi inherited this project and perfected it. Ruling for nearly half a century, he was the true architect of the Ur-III state. He wasn't just a king, he was a systems administrator. Shulgi standardized weights and measures across the land, ensuring a gur of barley was the same everywhere. He established a network of royal messengers who could speed official dispatches along designated routes. He pushed his armies into the surrounding hills, securing the trade routes that were the empire's arteries. In his royal hymns, he boasted of running the 100 miles between Nippur and Ur in a single day to attend festivals in both cities, presenting himself as a tireless, ever-present supervisor. Shulgi even had himself deified in his own lifetime. This wasn't just ego, it was policy. By becoming a god, he turned the state's bureaucracy into a form of sacred ritual. The meticulous records, the sealed receipts, the balanced accounts, these weren't just administration. They were proof that the cosmos was in order. If the columns on the tablet matched, then the heavens were aligned with the earth. The state's paperwork was a prayer for stability, and for a while, the prayer was answered. The heart of this system was the bala, a vast tax and redistribution program. Each province took its turn, for a set number of months, delivering a quota of its goods to the state's central storehouses. Grain, wool, cattle, sheep, fish, even labor, everything flowed into the center, and from there it was redistributed as rations for state workers, supplies for the temples, and provisions for the army. For decades, this pulse never stopped, knitting a dozen cities into a single economic body. Nowhere was this machine more visible than at Puzrish Dagan, a huge clearinghouse for the state's livestock near the holy city of Nippur. Imagine the noise, the dust, the smell. Thousands of sheep, cattle, and goats funneled in from the provinces. Scribes sit at wooden tables, their reed styluses flying across damp clay. 20 fattened sheep for the temple of Enlil, 5 prize bulls for the king's table, 100 lambs, payment for the weavers. Each animal is noted by age, sex, and condition. An official rolls his personal cylinder seal across the tablet, his signature, a guarantee of accuracy. We have found over 100,000 of these clay receipts. They are the paper trail of an empire so confident it believed it could count every single heartbeat in its domain. This system touched every life. A common monthly ration for a male laborer was 60 sela of barley, about 60 liters, along with portions of oil and wool. Women and children received less. These rations weren't just food. They were the currency of labor. Value was also tracked in silver. 1 shekel weighed about 8.3 grams. The tablets show how many shekels a gur of barley was worth, allowing us to see the economy in motion. For a time, it was a picture of immense, predictable stability. But beneath the surface of this perfect order, slow pressures were building. Centuries of irrigation agriculture in a hot, dry climate were taking their toll. Water brought to the fields evaporated, leaving behind tiny amounts of salt. Over generations, that salt accumulated, poisoning the soil. The evidence is right there in the state's own records. Earlier texts from the region show fields planted with both wheat and barley. By the time of Ur-3, wheat, which is less salt-tolerant, has almost completely vanished from the accounts. The farmers were forced to rely almost entirely on barley, a clear sign the soil was turning sour. Another pressure came from outside. Semi-nomadic peoples called the Martu or Amorites in the texts began pressing on the empire's frontiers. They raided caravans and disrupted travel on the roads and canals that were the state's lifelines. A messenger carrying a dispatch, a barge loaded with grain, both were now targets. The state that depended on constant, predictable movement was facing constant, unpredictable disruption. Under Ibbi-Sin, the final king, these pressures converged into a crisis. With the roads unsafe, provincial governors grew hesitant to send their precious grain on the long journey to Ur. Why risk losing a year's surplus to bandits when your own city might need it? The great bala system, the clockwork heart of the empire, began to miss a beat. A delivery from Umma is late. A flock from Lagash never arrives. In the capital, the warehouses grew emptier. The state cut rations. For a bureaucracy built on predictable inputs, this was a catastrophe. The numbers on the ledgers in Ur no longer matched the reality in the fields. And when grain became scarce, the value of silver began to fluctuate wildly. Tablets from Ibbi-Sin's reign show the price of barley sometimes doubling or tripling. The economic glue of the empire was dissolving. In this moment of crisis, the king sent a trusted official, Ishbi-Erra, north to the city of Isin to procure emergency grain supplies. Ishbi-Erra's letters back to his king survive. He reports that the grain is available, but the price is astronomical, and the Amorites make transport impossible. Then he makes a fateful decision. He holds on to the grain, secures the city of Isin for himself, and effectively declares his independence. It was a stunning betrayal. A high-ranking official, using the state's own resources to break away, leaving the capital to starve. The year names of Ibbi-Sin's reign tell the story of a king watching his world shrink. The triumphant names of his father and grandfather, year the temple was built, year the land was conquered, give way to desperate measures. Year the Great Wall was built to keep out the Martu. But the walls couldn't keep out famine, and they couldn't stop the political fragmentation as other cities followed Ishbi-Erra's lead. The very strength of the Ur-3 state, its rigid centralization, was now its fatal weakness. It was brittle. It could not adapt. The final blow came not from the Amorites, but from the east. A coalition of forces from Elam, led by a king named Kindatu of Shimashki, saw their opportunity. Around 2004 BCE, they swept down on a weakened, starving Ur. They breached the walls, and the world's most organized state collapsed into chaos. Ibbi-Sin was captured and led away in chains to Elam, never to be seen again. The city was sacked with breathtaking brutality. The violence of that moment is remembered in later texts and hinted at in the archaeological record. Destruction layers with ash and fallen bricks around the sacred precincts of Ur tell a story of fire and ruin. A state built on order ended in a storm of violence. The laments, written in the aftermath, describe a world turned upside down. The social order, once as rigid as the ziggurat's steps, shatters. In the streets, the dead lie unburied. Children cry for bread, but their mothers have nothing to give. The poems say the storehouses, once overflowing with barley, are now home only to silence and wind. The great gates, once sealed with bronze, are torn from their sockets, letting the enemy pour in like a bitter flood. This is the human cost of systemic failure, recorded not as a number, but as a cry of anguish. And yet, something remained. The core of Ur-Namma's great ziggurat survived the sack. It was too massive, too solid to be destroyed. Today, at the site of Tel el-Mukayyir in modern Iraq, its mud brick terraces still stand against the sky, a testament to the ambition of its builders. Over 1,000 years later, the last Babylonian king, Nabonidus, would excavate its foundations and rebuild its upper levels, honoring a ruin that had never left the memory of Mesopotamia. But Ur's most stunning legacy is its paperwork. Those hundreds of thousands of administrative tablets that have survived allow us to reconstruct the life and death of this empire with a clarity that is unmatched for its time. They allow us to watch the machine run, to read the rations lists, to track the herds, and then, in the final years, to see the cracks appear in the clay itself. We can watch the collapse happen almost in real time. The fall of Ur is a story about how a system's greatest strength can become its greatest weakness. The empire's hyper-centralized, data-driven model was incredibly efficient in times of stability. But when faced with multiple unpredictable crises, environmental stress, external raids, and internal betrayal, it lacked the flexibility to adapt. The ledger that had once been a tool of control became simply a record of an unstoppable failure. That scribe, 4,000 years ago, wrote that the gods had left the city. For a state that had declared its own order to be divine, this was the only possible explanation. When the perfect system failed, it felt like the universe itself had broken its promise. The scribe wrote a goodbye that the state, in all its meticulous planning, had never prepared for. If you appreciate these deep dives into a single empire's rise and fall, consider subscribing to Dustkings. There are more cities and more endings waiting for us in the dust.